All right, everybody, let's get started. So today is the last day of new content. Right, so Friday is test review day, and we'll probably have a little bit of time at the end of day for the beginning of that. So we'll probably have some question time. We just have 2 articles to go through, and then that's all of the content that you'll need. So the first article is one from Paul Bloom. Bloom actually wrote a whole book about this topic, and the book has the very catchy name, Against Empathy. Okay, I have to replace this. Against Empathy. Now, people often just look at that and then they don't notice the subtitle. The subtitle was The Case for Rational Compassion. So he's not advocating for people to be, jerks. He's just saying empathy is not the best moral guide. Funny story about this. I once had a girl over, and this book is on my shelf, and she looked and picked it out. She's like, "What's this? Why do you have this?" So, red flag. Yeah. So, it is a good book, but maybe if you're a guy, just put it in your drawers. But this paper contains kind of a condensed version of that argument. Before I explain his argument, I'm going to draw some distinctions that he makes. In ordinary speech, we may use these terms interchangeably, but here's how psychologists think about them. Empathy you can think of as including 2 different things. Cognitive empathy, which is similar to what developmental psychologists call theory of mind, and emotional empathy. So, cognitive empathy is the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, the ability to understand how they feel, what they think, etc. This is something that people on the autism spectrum struggle with. Right, so they are later in developing theory of mind and often don't fully develop a theory of mind. This is different from emotional empathy, which is feeling someone else's pain. So, cognitive empathy would be, I'm watching someone who's embarrassed, and I can understand, oh, that person's face is red, they feel embarrassed. Emotional empathy is, I have an emotional response myself, sort of feel embarrassed on their behalf. A kind of person who, or kind of disorder that may help you see the difference is psychopathy. Psychopaths typically do not have deficits in cognitive empathy. If they look at someone suffering, they can understand that they're suffering. They just don't have an emotional response to it. So that what they're lacking is the second kind of empathy. And it's that second kind that Bloom wants to say is not a good moral guide. He's not saying it's bad in all situations. For example, in a personal relationship, he thinks it's useful, but as a moral guide for society, he thinks it suffers various problems. He thinks what instead we should be relying on is compassion. Again, empathy and compassion may be used somewhat interchangeably in everyday speech, but when psychologists speak about compassion, what they mean is caring about how someone feels, whether or not you feel an emotional response to what they're feeling. So if I watch someone suffering, if I feel compassion, that means I want to help them, I hope I can help them feel better, but I'm not necessarily in distress myself. It's generally thought of as a more positive emotion. Whereas empathy, at least when it's directed at suffering, can be unpleasant to experience. Any question? Oh, yes.
Yeah, what's the difference then between compassion and cognitive empathy?
So cognitive empathy, it doesn't automatically mean you care about it. You could, but a psychopath could have cognitive empathy. So it's just you look at someone and you understand, cognitively or intellectually, what they're feeling. Yeah.
Does compassion, can compassion have an emotional response as well, or is it only without an emotional response but caring about how they see and feel?
I guess I would say you could have compassion and emotional empathy at the same time, but they're defined as different states. Compassion is caring about how someone feels, whether or not you're feeling their pain. I guess, well, the way that the second paper defines it, maybe they are somewhat more in tension, because they characterize compassion as a more positive emotion. So you feel, yes, I really want to help this person, but I'm not necessarily in distress. Other questions? Okay, so I should say emotional empathy is also what Batson is talking about. And Batson, of course, thinks well of emotional empathy. He thinks it's the main driver of altruism. But Bloom criticizes emotional empathy on 4 different grounds. So Bloom is not criticizing cognitive empathy. He's not going after that. The 4 critiques are that empathy is innumerate, biased, make sure I get the order right. It can motivate atrocities, and it can lead to burnout. So innumerate means it doesn't take numbers into account. It's very easy to feel empathy for one person, especially if they're presented in a very vivid way. Very hard to feel empathy for a statistic. So that's one way in which empathy can be not the best basis for a moral code, because it's easier to feel empathy for a smaller number of people. Even though when you think about it rationally, that doesn't really make sense. There's no reason to care more about one person than many. And there's some experiments that really bring this out. One study, I forget who did this, but in one condition you see one poor, suffering boy from a developing country, and they ask, hey, how much empathy do you feel for this kid? How much do you want to donate to help him? And you get pretty high responses. The other condition, you show the same boy and his sister. Lower empathy, less given. And the more people you add, the less empathy the people feel and the less they're willing to give. Now again, if you step back and think about it, that makes no sense. Adding the sister should not make you care less, but given that empathy is innumerate, that's why it leads to this kind of odd pattern of responses. With regard to bias, it's easier to feel empathy for people who are more similar to us. Easy to see how that could lead to various problems if we're using empathy as a moral code. This is so well established that Batson actually takes it for granted. Even though he's generally a pro-empathy guy, you may remember that one of the manipulations was you describe how the person is more similar to you, and he presupposes that that will increase empathy. Which, again, when you think about it, well, maybe we don't want to use that as a basis for morality. The third one might sound surprising, but when you look at various cases in history where crowds or societies were riled up to do terrible things, often empathy is a tool that's used to do it. So in the case of, obviously, bad topic, but lynchings in the United States, often the way they riled people up was with stories of African Americans raping white women, whether true or not. That was a way to get people to behave in evil and irrational ways. Bloom also mentions that in the lead up to the Iraq War, what many people did was talked about the crimes of Saddam Hussein, things he did against the Kurds or what have you. And I mean, obviously, it's good to feel, I guess, bad for people who suffer, but in that case, it kind of overrode reason and led to this obviously, illegal and disastrous war. And the last one, which leads us into the next paper, is that empathy can lead to burnout. There's studies finding that people in kind of helping professions, like doctors or therapists or things like that, if you focus on feeling empathy, it can be extremely taxing to try to feel everyone's pain that you're helping. Whereas something like compassion can be actually positive to feel. If you're motivated to help them, not necessarily focused on feeling their pain, that can be a more sustainable source of motivation. Bloom also notes a connection to Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist practice. Certain kinds of meditation in Buddhism are designed to kind of facilitate compassion, and not to dwell on the negative emotion caused by seeing someone suffer. So I'm not an expert in Buddhism, I won't say more about that, but some people have drawn a connection. Okay, before I move on to the last paper, any questions about these 4 critiques of empathy? Okay, so the next paper, this paper you cannot use in your paper. This is the one that I summarize in the sample paper. So it may give you some ideas for manipulations you could include, but it can't be especially one of the 2 papers you summarize. The paper begins by reviewing some of the literature on the different neural sources of empathy and compassion. Where empathy, and what they mean by empathy here is emotional empathy. Empathic reactions to suffering are rooted in the anterior cingulate cortex. Or ACC. And the anterior insula. So the anterior cingulate cortex is involved in all sorts of different things, but what's relevant here is it's involved, for example, in detecting errors. So if you're doing a kind of game and you make a mistake, the ACC lights up. It's also, maybe more relevantly, involved in the emotional response to pain. So if I touch a hot stove, 2 of the most common things you'll see lighting up are the somatosensory cortex, which is like the touch receptors. But this seems to be associated with the sensation of pain, of feeling, oh, that's bad. Yes?
Sorry, can you repeat? You said we're passive. What is in the interior when we're talking about relation to empathy?
Yeah, both of these are activated in empathy, when you're, especially empathy for suffering. So watching someone else suffer and having an empathic response. So as I was saying, anterior cingulate cortex is important for feeling pain. Insula also involved in pain and also involved in the emotion of disgust. The common thread seems to be it's involved in detecting bodily states. So disgust is a very visceral emotional response, as is pain, so the anterior insula seems to be involved in that. Compassion, by contrast, in prior studies, seems to be associated with activity in the striatum. And the striatum includes a region you've probably heard of, which is the nucleus accumbens. Have any of you remember this from 104? Can anyone tell me what the nucleus accumbens does? Anyone remember? So the nucleus accumbens, a very small but very important part of the brain, is crucial for the release of dopamine following rewarding or pleasurable activities. So, and as a result, actually, it's also involved in addiction. Any addictive drug, one of the main mechanisms by which the addiction gets instantiated is the nucleus accumbens. The other one is the medial orbitofrontal cortex, part of the frontal lobes, which is also involved in reward or pleasure. What they wanted to do in this study was do a manipulation, not just measure people saying they're feeling compassion or empathy, but have different conditions where they train people to feel empathy or train people to feel compassion. Any questions about the brain regions, though, before I erase this? Yeah.
What does the MLRC stand for?
Medial orbitofrontal cortex. It should be in the, yeah, the full name is in the key terms. So they had two arms of the experiment. One arm or one condition was the affect group that gets empathy training first and then compassion training. And then the other group is a control group that just gets memory training. So first group gets empathy training first, and then compassion training. And the other group, control group, gets memory training in each one. Both groups are shown two different videos. One that involves someone suffering, so you watch someone in pain following natural disaster or disease or various other things. That's the high emotion videos. And then a controlled set of videos that are emotionally neutral, that don't involve suffering. And I should say that the training they receive is consistent with the definitions of empathy and compassion we've been working with, where in the empathy training, you're taught how to feel the person's pain, put yourself in their shoes, whereas here you're taught to be neutral with regard to whether you're feeling their pain or not, and just focus on wanting them to be better and so on. Yes.
Do you actually have to help someone in compassion to get the dopamine or reward response, or do you just have to want to help?
I think that in this study would be consistent with just you have to want help, because I don't believe in either condition you actually help. You just watch these videos. So, yeah, I think that'd be the answer to that. So they measured how much empathy they felt, how much negative emotion they felt, and how much positive emotion they felt in these various conditions. And the results are what you would expect, given what we've said so far. Relative to baseline, and when I say how much you feel those things, I mean during the high emotion videos, during the videos of someone suffering. Empathy leads to an increase in empathy, obviously, and negative emotion. Whereas compassion leads to decreased negative affect and increased positive affect. And they also replicated the works, so they did fMRI, scanned their brains using fMRI while they were watching the videos, and consistent with prior studies, empathy led to changes in the anterior insula and anterior cingulate cortex, whereas compassion training led to changes in the medial orbitofrontal cortex and the striatum, both of which are involved in reward or pleasure. Okay, and that is the last bit of information that you need for the test. Any questions about this study? Yeah.
Can you say, or can you repeat what you said, the compassion results?
For the brain or for the states?
For the state?
Yeah, so it led to less negative emotion or affect and more positive emotion or affect.
Dumb question, but what does MEM stand for?
Memory. This is just a control condition. They also measured how well each group did on memory tasks, and memory training led to better performance on that, but that's not very interesting for us. So it was just kind of a control to compare the other two. Yep.
What's it called? Paper?
The paper?
Yeah.
This is the Klemecki paper. So it's the last one before Unit 2. Okay. Okay, so we'll watch a video to summarize. This is a video from Paul Bloom talking about his case against empathy, which draws on, in a way, both papers. And then we'll also do a little activity to reinforce something. There's an activity I wanted to save just to make sure we had enough time. And then I'll throw it open for questions if there are. Okay, so here's a little activity we'll do. We're gonna play the prisoner's dilemma. I sped over this just to make sure we got through everything, but this will hopefully get the logic of the game kind of into your heads. So once I say go, you're gonna get into pairs and wait for me to say go. You're gonna stand facing away from each other and do a thumbs up or a thumbs down and hold it in place and then turn around. Thumbs up means you cooperate, thumbs down means you defect. And we'll see who gets the most points. We'll make it a little game. C means cooperate, D means defect. So if you both cooperate, you both give a thumbs up, you both get 3 points. And that's the best case scenario overall. If one cooperates and one defects, that's the best case scenario for you selfishly. Because then you'll get 5 points, the other person gets 0 points. Cooperate, you both get 3. If you both defect, you both give the thumbs down, you both get 1. And no talking about what you're going to do. You have to just decide whether to trust the person or not. We'll do just, I think, 5 rounds randomly with different people, and then 5 rounds with one person. You'll see kind of the different pressure you feel. So stand up. You can use the space here. Obviously, I won't include this part in the video. So find a partner. Okay, so hopefully I didn't ruin any budding friendships or anything with this game, but, oh, by the way, so who won the single game version? So, or who thinks they got the highest amount of points? What are some points? 7?
17.
17?
17. Yeah.
Anyone get higher than 17? Okay, this is a many-way tie. Okay, that's less interesting. Who thinks they got the highest points? Well, the second one, it'll almost have to be a tie, but who thinks they got the highest out of the second? What are some points? The second version? Did anyone do better than 17 on the second one? No, okay, so, yes, what'd you get?
19.
19 on the second version? Anyone do better than 19? Okay, we have a winner, yay. You get nothing for it, but. So, a few things to notice. Number one, this reinforces what I said earlier where reciprocal altruism is only adaptive when you see the same person again and again. In the single game version, you may have noticed there's more pressure to cheat. You're not going to play with the person again, so you should do what's individually rational for you. Well, you've already seen that. But, yeah, so there, the rational thing is to defect. In the repeated game version, it's rational to cooperate because if you don't, the other person won't cooperate next time, then you'll wind up just defecting on each other over and over again. And this also has the structure of many real-life dilemmas, right? Where the best case scenario for both people considered equally is if you cooperate, right? If you're working together on a task, that's the best case scenario. But if you're being selfish, the best case scenario is the other person cooperates and you don't. You don't have to do any of the work, but you get benefit from what they're doing. But then, of course, if neither of you cooperate, if you both defect, that's bad for both of you considered equally. Like the prisoner's dilemma version may have seemed kind of goofy with these two people, getting arrested, but it has the structure of many real-life cooperative situations. Okay, so we have 15 minutes left. We can start test review early if you like. Any questions on any of the key terms or any content for the test? Yep.
Do you mind going over aversive arousal reduction hypothesis? Was that the last thing we were talking about?
It's the thing from Batson's. That's one of Batson's hypotheses. It's one of the egoistic hypotheses about why people engage in altruism, like helping behavior. The idea there is you feel an aversive arousal, so you feel unpleasant when you watch someone else suffer, and you want to get rid of that. And he designed different experiments to try to rule that out. Other questions? Yep.
Are you able at all, I don't know if you can answer this, able to answer at all which lists of key terms from the extra readings to pay attention to?
I can't say that other than what I said last class, which is the Feinberg and Batson readings will not be on the definition questions. You can use them for one of the written, and on Friday during the test review day, I'll give you, well, I've already given quite a bit of subtle hints, but I'll give you a pretty good idea of what the 3 written will be about, so you can prepare for those. But so one of them, you could use the Feinberg or Batson papers to answer, but you don't have to memorize all the definitions from those ones.
For the definitions, is it gonna be multiple choice or long answer?
It'll be not long, it'll be written. Probably you can get away with one sentence. So yeah, so if you forgot from the first day, so the test will involve 9 definition questions, and those will each be worth 1%. 1% of your final grade. And 1%, well, out of the, yeah, so 1% of your final grade. And then 3 written questions, and those are each worth 2%. So it adds up to 15% total. The written questions, 2, maybe more. I mean, look, you have the time you have. Try to impress me as much as you can, but probably 2 sentences will be good enough for the written. And for the definition, probably 1 sentence is fine. But yes, it's entirely written. One thing I did say on the first day, and I'll repeat, in general, the definition questions will be terms I spent more time on. I may throw in 1 or 2 that are a little more obscure, but generally it's going to be the ones that I spent more time talking about in the class. Yeah.
Would you mind just, the last paper that we talked about,
Yep.
Mackie, I think, would you mind just repeating what they found in the fMRI?
Yeah, so they replicated prior work, finding that in the empathy training, there were more changes in anterior cingulate and anterior insula, which are both involved in pain and detection of pain in the body, as well as some other things, but that's what's relevant to that. And the compassion training led to more changes in the medial orbitofrontal cortex and the striatum, both of which are involved in pleasure and reward.
Okay, so exactly what.
Exactly what you'd expect. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Can you go over the empathy altruism hypothesis again?
Yeah, so that's the alternative to the various egoistic hypotheses that Batson had. So people engage in altruistic behavior, right? We see that in everyday life. They help people. The question is, why do people do that? The empathy altruism hypothesis says people engage in altruism because they feel the other person's pain, or they're responding empathically to the pain. The various other hypotheses are different versions of when they help, they're just trying to help themselves. They feel guilty or feel bad in some way, and they're trying to get rid of that. So the empathy altruism one is the one that Batson favors. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so we can call it there then. So I'll see you for test review. You can come with any other questions, and I'll give you a sense of what the... Actually, I'll do something. Show of hands. Would you rather me just give the written now, since there aren't as many questions? I'll just give you the written now. So that way you don't have... I will tell you right now, there will not be an attendance check on Friday. So if you feel super confident, I guess you don't really have to come to that. So one of the written questions will be about reflective equilibrium, which I think I mentioned in one class. One will be about the types of evidence there are for morality being innate. And that question will give you flexibility. You can draw on different types of argument or evidence, but so you can draw on different things there. So again, to repeat, evidence that's relevant to whether or not morality is innate. And then the final one will be about egoism. So different arguments against egoism. So you could draw on the book, Batson, or Feinberg for that. So you should come ready for those 3. Yep.
Wait, could you repeat the second one again?
Yeah, the second one is, so there's various lines of evidence in the readings and the book that morality is innate, at least to some degree. So it's going to give you an opportunity to draw on those different lines of evidence. So you'll have some flexibility with that one. Yep.
For the third question, was it arguments for egoism or against?
Against, which there's more of. There's more to choose from there. There's really only well, the Feinberg paper has some prima facie arguments for egoism, but they're not very good. So yeah, it'll be arguments against. Okay, so there you go. So yeah, hopefully that helps you study. So I do have office hours today, but not on Friday. So I'll see some of you on Friday, and hopefully all of you on Monday before the test.